that changes are possible if we have the will to act. And now I'd like to invite Mark Chivers to join me on the stage for our next panel discussion on what local communities can do in response to the climate emergency. Mark is our former UK Climate Reality Regional Coordinator. He is a lifelong activist and has been focusing on climate initiatives and campaigns for over a decade. He co-founded and now leads the Zero Carbon Dorset project, which aims to identify what the County of Dorset needs to do to be a net zero county by 2030. Please join me in welcoming Mark Chivers.
Thank you, Shuka. And hello, everybody. It's great to be here. And it's towards the end of the session. So there's two guests that I've got joining me later. But the session we've got today will hopefully open up in a moment. We're talking about green communities, but as Shuka's already mentioned, this is really about community action. And I just wonder whether those people in the room who consider themselves to be community activists could just stand up for a moment. There's a few. Interesting, maybe about half. I imagine it's slightly more than that, but thank you very much. You can sit down. And can I just check, as it is getting towards the end of the day, if you're still here, could you stand up? No, it's okay. Don't worry if you don't sign to. Okay, so green communities, community action is really about action from the ground up. We've seen recently, Eric, on his slides, and this is a similar one showing the same information. Our greenhouse gas emissions have been rising continuously. And if we look at this chart, we can see back in the early 1990s, so around the time that we first started internationally to address this problem, we had the Rio Convention in 92, set up the UNFCCC, started to have all the COPs, 27 of them, and it's continued to go up every single year since, apart from the dip in the pandemic, and then it's come back up since. 6 years ago at Paris, the international community committed to achieving no more than 2 degrees warming and to aim for 1.5 degree. We now know that actually we may get to 1.5 degrees within the next 6 years. So there's real evidence that what's happening from the top down isn't delivering where we need to go. So there's some great news stories underneath the surface. There's lots going on. We've heard about lots of it today, but fundamentally relying on top down is not getting us to where we need to be. So one little analogy of change I'd just like to reflect on and why as communities we can still influence that top-down activity. It's the analogy of politicians being like balloons, not just because they're often full of hot air, but because they can be considered to be tied to a rock. That rock is the rock of public opinion. Now, the decisions they can make, they can take within whatever is their political views or their ideology, but to a certain extent, it's constrained by public opinion. So our goal as activists is to move that public opinion to a direction by which politicians themselves have to move, so that actually they no longer have any option but to put the policies in place that will address this crisis. Eleni touched on the decisions of councils to declare climate emergencies. They did that because of climate activists, because of community activists, not because they suddenly woke up one morning and decided it was now the right thing to do. But as she also said, many of those councils now are not delivering the plans that we need them to. So there's a couple of questions really we need to think about in this area. What do we mean by community? What do we mean by community action? Where do you start? And what are the barriers? And hopefully during the course of some of the discussion this afternoon, and if we've got time, hopefully we can bring a few of you in as well. We'll be looking at some of those. My background, as Shuka mentioned in the introduction, I guess why I'm running this session, unless it was just there was no one else available, is that having trained as a climate reality leader nearly 10 years ago now, it got me thinking, well, if we need to get to zero, where are we now? And what actually do we need to do to get there? And what would that look like for my area? So over a number of years, we pulled people together, had open sessions that anybody could come along to, and we looked at all the areas that we've talked about in different sessions today: reducing energy, powering ourselves by renewables, how we transport ourselves, feed ourselves, how we look after the land, climate justice, education. Looked at all of those things. And for each of those areas, we said, okay, what's the problem that people need to be aware of? Where would we ideally like to be? How far away from that are we? And what do we need to do to get there? And in doing that, we also asked people to think about a vision of what it would actually look like to live in a county where we'd solved those problems, where people were leading happier, healthier lives, but we'd also solved the climate issues along the way. So now we've got this book out there. It's much longer than we ever intended. It's about 75,000 words long, probably too long for anybody to read. But we've got this information out there. We're now rolling out to the community and to use that with different groups to try and explain to people that actually the answers are there. And this is what it could look like in this area. Here's the data you need. This is what's happening in this area. This is how you address it. And part of that discussion is to get people involved in other groups and envisaging what it might look like, including we've got a student who's at the local arts university who is in our project team, and she started pulling together this big image of vision of what Dorset might look like in the future. Now, the aim of this is really just to pose questions to get the conversation started. So we're not going to study it in detail, but that's what we'll be doing at some of our events during the year, because as well as the noticeable Dorset landmarks at the top, so for any of you who know the county, that's Old Harry Rock, that's Poole Harbour. What you won't have seen if you ever come to Dorset in the top corner is our offshore wind farm, which was turned down by the local council and the government some time ago, but we're about to start campaigning to get that put back on the map again. But also in the detail of on the high street, if you look at the individual areas, what's actually happening in those shops, what's actually happening in those libraries, how are we moving around? There's a couple of dams in the river at the top. That's because in one of the parts of the county, they've reintroduced beavers. So there's lots of things that are going on in this area. And this is of trying to get people to think about what it would look and feel like to live in a county where we've solved the problems. So we're going to go through some of those questions today, but I'm going to hand straight over actually to somebody who is living that visionary experience and is doing fantastic things in Derby. Sorry, just out of sync with my presentation. So I'd like to welcome onto the stage. I'm actually not going to talk about his story because I really like Jamie to do that for himself. So Jamie Quince-Starkey.
I wish you did. You'd save me a job. Oh, lovely. So I feel like this is the end of the night when, you know, open mic nights. And the guys had the most drinks at the end and he has a go. That's me. It's time for the riffraff. So yeah, I'm Jamie. I'm the founder of Down to Earth Project. A project found actually growing in my back garden, pun intended. You know, it was an epiphany that I had from a conflict that I've got that is quite apparent in especially my class, a working class person. So, you know, I've worked planes, trains and automobiles for the last 10 years. I've worked shift work for the last 10 years and I've felt the effects of shift work on my mental health and my well-being quite significantly. And the way that I improved my mental health and well-being was getting outdoors. There's only so much a pub and playing football can do at the weekend. And spending time outdoors, it led me on a journey, and I'm still a shop floor factory fitter, by the way, but I do this full time. There is a bit of confusion, but it will make sense. Don't worry about that. But I build airplane engines for a living, done that for the last 6 years. And I've had a massive conflict, a nature enthusiast at heart, but to keep a roof over my head and building airplane engines, because it brings the money in and it looks after my kids and it looks after my wife. And I remember the week, and I can't remember who I was talking to earlier, but I really remember the week that I found and had this kind of epiphany, this idea. And I started the week at Eden Project. So I don't know, hands up if you've been to the Eden Project in Cornwall. Big up. Yeah, it's a great place, isn't it? So we started with an annual pilgrimage to the Eden Project. And then end of the week, I finished night shifts and I was sat on the sofa like a slob. And I was watching the end of planet Earth and I was going, this is it, what's the point? Why should I bother? Nothing's going to happen. This is the end of the world. Humans are rubbish. Like, I'm just going to sit here, eat my crisps and do nothing. And my wife came home and she's like, come on, we're going in the garden. Come on, we're just going in the garden. I was like, nah, I'm not doing it. She did, because women are like that. They will get their way eventually. And she got me outside and the intention was to spend half an hour. And we ended up being out there for 3 hours. And it was a transformative experience from coming out and going, right, I'm just going to weed, to I'm going to actually change my garden. And we sorted our veggie patch out, and there was a physical change in me, and there was a spiritual change. And I mean that. And talking to the narrative thing that we were talking about earlier, we have to change our language. We have to start talking that deep. That's how significant that narrative change needs to be. And I had an epiphany, and I was like, oh, if that's how I feel, and it was that easy to do, then if everybody did this, and I know it's not that way, but if everyone can do this, imagine the change in behavior, imagine the change in emotional way of looking at the world. And you become the change, you be the change. And especially from my background, I was told when I left school, the best thing that I will do is work on cars. I'll be a car apprentice. I'll be working on cars for the rest of my life, and that'll be a success. So I've big imposter syndrome talking right now to you guys. So yeah, had this epiphany, and I was like, okay, we have to make connecting with nature accessible. Not physically, because we have all these green spaces, they're everywhere. More psychologically. There's psychological barriers that are stopping people from having that relationship with nature and being disassociated with nature. So how do you do that? I just whacked my phone out and started filming and basically saying how sick nature was, how cool nature was, like how banging it is. And all my friends at work, obviously, yeah, they took the mick to begin with. But as time progressed, they actually started asking me for plants, which I thought was a bit cheeky. And then they were like asking me asking me for advice, and I was winging it anyways, growing food. And I could see the change. I could see the change in their mindset. And then things led one to another. Our social media platform went a bit crazy. And we did a little film that we filmed and we screened at our local arts and culture centre, which set off its own, that set off the snowball and set off the avalanche, because we ended up doing an allotment, and we ran allotment sessions with people, from all walks of life. And our USP has been, don't tell people what they're going to get out of it. Just show them, respect other humans, and they'll get it, because we are all part of nature. So we started doing that, and we started doing walks in the Peak District once a month, and they blew up. They went crazy. Like, we had people from Halifax to Portsmouth come to these rambles in the peaks that we were just chucking out on socials. And then we were having people we had a teacher from Denmark. I love this story so much. I repeat it all the time. We had a teacher from Denmark message us on social media saying she wanted to come to Derby because of what we were doing on an allotment. She wanted to bring her class with her. And I was like, you are crazy. Don't do that. That is mad. But it showed, if you've got a real idea, share it. And there's three elements that I really want like to take away from my waffle. And that is, it's not ready, aim, fire. It's ready, fire, aim. You can ask me about that later. And then the other one is, I need to check my list. My head's gone. I've got that much to tell you. So the other one is how powerful our collective imagination is. Like, that's a superpower, and it's not to be, we should never put that away. You've just had that visual of what you want to do in Dorset. And collective imagination is our shared superpower, and we should be using that to its maximum, especially now. And then my last thing, because it's quite naughty, break the rules. We have to break the rules now. Like, we're at that point, you have to break the rules. And I say that because allotment wars are real. If anyone knows about allotment wars are a real thing, and some things that we were doing was kind of not agreeable to certain demographics, but we were all open for all different people, and we just shared a space, and we didn't say come here for this, and people sharing grief. And I had messages from people, which was really overwhelming, telling me that from what we were doing during COVID on our allotment site saved their lives. And if you're gonna save someone's life and you have to break the rules to do it. You have a duty of care as a human being to just do that, no matter what. So, I know I'm waffling here, mate, but do you want me to go through that presentation?
What I think would be really good, I think, to reinforce your message is maybe pick from that presentation one or two of the images of what you've actually achieved.
Yeah.
And one or two of the ones where you're envisaging what things could be like.
So cut along, I've not got a lot of time here, and as you probably can tell, I like to talk. But I started with this idea in the garden, and it was all about giving people revelations in nature, their own revelations with their relationship with nature. We started there. We did things with the community. We had this grassroots idea. COVID happened. We all had quarter life, midlife, existential crisis. We all went crazy. And I decided that ready, fire, aim. I've just got to bang the idea out. I've got this vision. Derby's perfectly geographically positioned in the middle of the country. We've got the Peak District on our doorstep. And I was like, if Eden Project can do it in an old disused Chinese clay pit quarry, why can't I do it in Derby? So kind of followed that. The rest of the story is really mad. I met Tim Smith, the founder of Eden Project. He got me off work by emailing the chief exec of Rolls-Royce. So they're on board, which is crazy. And then the chief exec of Rolls-Royce has now sponsored me for the last 2 years to run Down to Earth, which is a social enterprise. We're a community interest company. And, there's a lot to digest into the community. I think if you go to the slide, which is the highlighted one with the yellow on the map, if you go, is it gone? Just go to the one with the big visual, I think. So yeah, that's the one, and then we'll go to the other one. So I came back from Eden Project, and I met Tim, and he was like, "You've got this great idea. We're backing you. I haven't got no money, but I'm going to back you." And I came back to Derby, and lo and behold, as soon as I said we've got the Eden Project on board, and I'm working from Rolls-Royce, City Council were like, "Well, we've got these spaces." I was like, "Okay, cool." So we had a look at these spaces and just let our imagination just go wild as a community and just talk to people about what they would like to see in the city centre. And that went crazy because we ended up actually getting the head architect at Eden Project to do our illustrations, and he's nuts. He's more nuts than me. And he took our imagination 100 times further, which is the next slide. So these are they're the visuals. And this is the illustration of the city centre that we brought to the city. So actually, no, it was this April just gone. We had 360 people from education sector, private sector, public sector, big businesses, small enterprises, you name it, everyone was there. And we just showcased this idea. And we were just like, could you imagine if we did this? Like, imagine if we did this? And the thing that was a bit crazy was we didn't get any critique. Like, nobody said this is a bad idea, which added like a lot of fuel to the fire. So we followed this, and since we showcased this in April, we've had 40 projects and programs kind of in a pipeline. I'm running around chasing cats and eels, trying to bring it all together. And now we've got 3 of these projects on this picture that are going to go live next year. And we've got buy-in from the seniors of the city council, the seniors of the university, the seniors of big business. And what are the messages to take away? Well, a piece of advice. There's a lot of plates to spin here. And if we're going to create change, it has to be top down, bottom up, middle out. And if we do that, we can create real change. And we're proving the concept. And the concept for us, we've gone from doing what we do, grassroots level, being an independent catalyst for nature-based regeneration now. And we're wanting to holistically change the city centre with the community. And we're doing it. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm sure you'll all agree with me. It's absolutely inspirational what Jamie and his team are doing there. Our next speaker actually has been involved in Ukrainian agriculture since 1992. He's over 35 years experience in 70 countries, including 25 years program manager for a wide range of clients, including the World Bank and the UNDP. He's over 10 years experience in the agricultural finance sector and has been awarded a Medal of Honor by the government of Ukraine for the management and achievement of his support to SMEs in the rural sector project. He's now a trainer and facilitator for topics as broad as crop insurance, finance, cooperatives, SMEs, and rural development. And communities is very much at the heart of everything that Gary does. So I'd like to welcome from just south of Kiev, Gary's joining us today. Thanks, Gary.
Well, thank you. I'm planning on putting up a few slides. Can I do that? Share screen. Can we see on the screen right now? I'm here for my children. Does that work?
We can indeed. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. I just put those on there because it helps me to chat a little bit about things. But let's just say that I am in Ukraine, and it's true. I've been here since the early 90s, working with the World Bank, but also working with other organizations like the UN and other organizations. So it's been quite a relevant period of time. But I must say that as we're looking at the war today in Ukraine, we really need to be able to figure out, a little bit about how we're going to be moving into the future. Okay, we might want to say, well, first of all, let's get the Russians out of here. And you might have seen on the news today that, of course, there has been fighting down in the south, and the Ukraine has pushed the Russians back across the Dnieper River, which runs north to south in Ukraine. But basically, we really need to be able to understand, in my opinion, that the future is really something that we need to have young people be interested in. Because, well, for me, I can say, yeah, I can live a few more years, but in fact, the younger people are going to are going to need to be able to reorient themselves on a different kind of a life, maybe, than the kind of life that we have today. So that's a little bit why I just wanted to chat a little bit about that. But certainly when we're talking about climate change and getting back to young people, I think it impacts everyone, but I think really it's more about the young people who have to be aware of what's going on. Everybody knows about Greta Thunberg. Everybody knows about all of the Friday afternoons when they were out doing the trying to discuss that, with their countries and with what was happening in their cities. And it's quite important that these things become rather important for the future. And many of the young people say, well, these older people, the people running in the various administrative capacities or the large corporate activities, they are not really paying attention to the future like we want the future to be paid to. And so I do think this is a very relevant thing that we need to be able to discuss. I mean, I can go back to agriculture. I do have a PhD. Been doing this, I think you said for 25 or 30 years. Actually, it's 48 years. I left the United States in 1975. But anyway, and the other thing I just want to say is that, yeah, I belong to a group of world scientists, you know, and there's a lot of them. There's actually 26,000 of them in the group that I belong to, working in 180 countries. And we're looking here at an intergenerational approach. Those of us, you know, let's say that are involved in academic activities, but at the same time, we know that the future, we really need to be focusing, you know, on the opportunities for young people to go into the future. The other thing that strikes me from the work that I've been doing around the world is that, you know, communities planned and communities versus market-led communities, because today we're talking about communities, you know, and communities planning is quite relevant, but the market-led aspects are things that kind of cause me a little bit of consternation. I mean, most of us probably know what about the neoliberal activities of the corporate sectors, but we need to be able to understand that these activities are going to need to be changed as we move forward into the coming decades, and it's not like we can wait until the end of the century. I think we need to do a lot to be able to overcome a lot of issues in the world today by, let's say, 2050, for example. So one of the things that strikes me as my work that was involved, and I did work internationally, not just here in Russia, the Soviet Union, Ukraine, and other activities. It's also, I worked in 17 countries in Africa. I've worked all over South Asia, but basically, what I've been able to understand as we move forward is that the essential properties of the systems are properties of the whole. We're really talking, you know, about how these things are integrated, you know, and this is quite important, I think, for me. So really, we're talking mostly about a systems view of the way that we're looking at the future. We just can't say, well, this one thing is all that we need to take care of. No, that's not enough. We need to be able to look at the system, understand how they coordinate with one another in communities, and end up, you know, finding a way that allows us to move forward. I don't know if this is true or not, but I was reading some stuff and it said that 67% of many people, you know, concerning, you know, climate crises and some of the issues of today, say that they rarely or never even talk about the climate crisis. Is that true? I don't know, but certainly it's something that I would like to see that it's not true. I hope in the future we move away from that. But going a little bit farther, let me just say, you know, some issues concerning cooperatives. Now, many people don't really think about cooperatives too much in the United States, but in Europe, we're seeing the development of cooperatives and in community structures, you know, in various countries in the EU and elsewhere. Cooperatives is a kind of a business. People think it's not a business. No, it's a business like any business, actually. But the difference is that it's being operated at a much lower level than, say, some of the businesses that are in operational in the United States, for example, and I think also in the UK, but not only. So I would very strongly recommend that, you know, we find ways that if we're going to be working in communities, that we figure out how does a community operate? How can we work together? How can we work with the young people? How can we work the older people? How can we make things work in such a way that as we go forward in the next decades or 2 or 3, that we're actually going to be moving in the right direction and not in the wrong direction? Because actually, as I see it today, the world is actually moving in the wrong direction too much. There's some, of course, there's maybe a percentage, who knows whether it's 5 or 10%, that of course is doing really wonderful things. But the major activities that I see, whether it's large corporate activities or even business opportunities and businesses operating in different places, that they're not quite realistically in the term of the way the changes that we're going forward and need to go forward. So let me switch over to Ukraine just a little bit, because I wanted to be able to do that a little bit. You know, you probably don't know, or maybe you do know, that Ukraine, let's say when I started working here in the 90s, was a ex-Soviet country. And all of where I live today, actually outside of Kyiv, I have a flat in Kyiv also, but I'm outside of Kyiv now because of the war. You know, in the 30s, you know, Stalin, you probably know, basically murdered many Ukrainians and took their lands away from them and created what we call kolkhozes. Well, it may be like a cooperative, but it's not a cooperative like we know in Europe or United States or other places in the world. But anyway, these cooperatives in 1991, they were returned back to the people who work on these, let's say, agricultural areas, these actual agricultural communities, and they began to produce, but they are producing in a large way. And let's just say what is happening during the war, but it's not just during the war. 15 to 30% from both Russia and Ukraine, they're producing enough of the grain and a lot of food requirements for the countries in Africa, in the Middle East particularly, and also in China and other countries. Ukraine has turned into a country that is actually becoming, perhaps, in my opinion, one of the best and one of the most realistic and growing agricultural countries in the world. It has to be able to develop local communities, because that's how these things work, develop local communities, and these local communities have to begin to operate in realistic ways that allows them to move this food to other places in the world that is absolutely required. And of course, if we look at the climate issues that are involved with food production, when we're talking about the regenerative agriculture and the other activities, that are very important when we're talking about food production in the future, these things are really important for the next decades, 1 decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, whatever you want to say. If we do not move ahead and have the opportunities to be able to produce this high quality food, transfer it out, into various countries, particularly in Africa and Asia, then we're going to be seeing huge issues in the world. And let me just show a little slide now. So here is a slide that I think is very important for those of us who are dealing with the future. This says environmental water scarcity index by basin, high stress belt by 2030. And look at the ones that are exceptionally more stressed, the red ones, and extremely more stressed. Where is that taking place? Well, we can see that it's taking place very significantly in many parts of West Africa, East Africa, India, most of the Middle East. You can see the Middle East is just, and parts of China, as we can see happening. Actually, in the United States, in the western part of the United States also. So what we're seeing is we have to be able to recognize the fact that we in our communities need to be able to understand that we need to find a different way of life that allows us, to overcome these issues that are going to impact us if we don't stop, some of the issues like the use of oil, the use of gas and things of this nature. If we're not able to stop these activities, what we see on the map here today, lots of crises coming up in the next 10 to 20 to 30 years. And this bothers me. This bothers me a lot because I often feel that people are talking about the different things that are currently going on in the world today. And they're saying, well, this is the situation, and this is the situation, and we need to be able to do that. They're talking about it, but they're not doing it. So I'm much more interested in what we might want to say social action in these areas. I think it's very important, because without social action, I don't think most of these things are going to be changed in the next 2 or 3 decades. And another thing would be what I usually like to call it a community discourse. If we're talking about communities need to be able to know each other, work with each other, talk to each other. I think that's really important. The more that we can work together as a community, whether it's the cooperative or whether it's just the way we're able to reorganize our community, reduce the number of, let's say, gasoline-based machines, I've actually talked to a lot of children. You might want to think that a car is going to be something wonderful for you in the coming, but you might understand that it's much better for you to be able to consider that a bicycle may even be better than that. You don't need all of that. So I'm just going to finish up without doing too much on this, because hopefully there's some ways we can discuss this and have some questions from the group. But the last thing I really want to discuss is what I like to call minimalization. This is something, let's say that Europe and the United States continue to have a very materialistic kind of a world, but we're not going to see that in other countries in the world, as you can see on the map that I was showing a little bit earlier. But we need to be able to understand that maybe in the last, let's say, 50 years of my life, maybe 60 years, the world has switched away from a more easy living, let's say minimalistic type of a life, to a life today that's becoming terribly difficult for many different people. And the question is that really needed? And that's the big question that I have as I talk to youth, and I sometimes teach courses on this particular activity. There's many things in the world, a lot of these materialistic things, they started back in the 1930s in the United States and in UK and other countries, and they increased these materialistic activities in homes and in families. And when I was alive back in the United States, I left the United States in 75, that was when the United States was pretty much equal, let's put it that way. We could have a relatively small house, a car, maybe one car. We could go to the university without having to pay extra money like they do in the United States today. But then long about 1980 and on till today, we're seeing that there's a very great movement towards, some individuals gaining much more, let's say, profitable activities on one hand, and others on the other end having more and more problems in how they're going to work towards the future. And that would be in Europe and maybe in the United States. And if we go to the south, let's say into Russia, into the Middle East, and not Russia, into Africa and into the Middle East, then we're going to see that this is going to be a big issue for them as we go forward. So what do we do here in Europe? What do we do here in Ukraine? We forget about it. We say, well, those poor people, those poor people. No, I think we have to reorient the way we think and include them in the future prospects for the planet. And we all know that if we don't stop some of these oil and gas issues, we're going to end up, having very difficult problems within 10, 20, 30 decades. So I think that's enough, probably too much. But if you want to see, I do have children. We also bring here, this guy here in the middle is from the UK. And this is the farm that I live on. And the farms in, of course, Ukraine are some of the most beautiful farms that you're going to find anywhere in Europe.
Thanks, Gary. That was really insightful. Hopefully you can stay with us for a while. We'll open up to some questions in a moment. We've covered, I guess, as I said in the questions, what is a community, and we've seen a number of different aspects of that in terms of the work that Jamie's doing. I guess in my area, we often talk about it being a community of communities. How do we inspire or provide information to individual communities out there to do what they want to do? Gary referenced there that actually it's at community level that we need to make things happen. One of the things I think that was implicit in Jamie's description, but is also evidenced in many areas, is about how taking action gives you hope. In the face of some of this overwhelming information, I think it's when people roll up their sleeves and do things that actually enables you to maintain that positive outlook. I'm happy to open up to some questions, but also would be interested if people have we're sort of short of time now, so I'm sort of thinking very short contributions, but if people have got stories of community or questions about community they'd like to share, rather than just a question, then please also feel free to contribute. So any questions or comments from anyone? Yes, what do you need?
That one's working. Do you want that one?
I love your phrase, ready, aim, no, ready, fire, aim. I think that's genius. All right. Hello, Jamie. I love your phrase, ready, fire, aim. I think that's absolutely genius in terms of actually getting real change. Do you just want to elaborate on that?
I can't take credit for it, for one. It was actually a phrase, it was told to me by friends right at the beginning. I'm having these crazy ideas and I'm throwing everything at him and he's just like, do it, mate. It's like, just do it. Nike, just do it. You know, there's a reason why they've been so successful with that marketing strategy. And ready, fire, aim is essentially, if you have an idea, just get it on the wall and see what sticks. And you will hone in onto the target. You will hone in onto what the vision is. You know, talking about Eden Project, for an example, that idea was to have the largest greenhouse in the world. That's how it started. And now it's a living library of plants. Ooh, spooky, isn't it? Yeah. Well, it's a living library of plants now. And, you know, they're looking to save seed and they've got so many rare species and they're showing the story of the world in a disused Chinese clay pit quarry. And, you know, if that doesn't capture your imagination, I don't know what does, but I hope that answers.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant.
Thank you. Any others?
Hi, everyone. So it's more of a statement really about Jamie. So I'm a citizen of Derby, and the speed and scale of Jamie's Down to Earth project has been like mind-blowing. It's a real proof of concept example, not just nationally, but internationally now. Like everybody's involved in it. So I thought it was, he didn't get the time to do that justice. So just a bit of a public kudos for Jamie and his project, really. But the question is, like, I think community action is the future. Like, what clear next step? What could we go away and on Monday start to do? What's the first action that we could do in our communities to start moving forward, do you think?
Break the rules. We have to break the rules. Like we have to find other ways. The only way, you know, we've spoke a lot about getting the power and reparations and, you know, communities taking power. That only happens by you're not going to get given it. You don't get given them things. You have to take them. You really have to take them, because that's what's happened for all this time. And, you know, I think the things that we can go away and do is use your imagination to its full potential. It's the most powerful thing. In Derby, Tim will know this, we have our heads down. We are super pessimistic, you know, which is weird, but we always say nothing ever happens here. So it's a thing that people say. And I'm like, no, everything's going to happen here. Everything's going to happen here. You've just got to wait. You've just got to see. It's going to happen. And just by changing the way that you speak and talking to people, I think that is the first thing that you can do within communities, is just have a different language. Be optimistic. Be a hopeless optimist, and start spreading. I'm not saying start spreading false positivity, but start sharing good stories, and that will breed more good stories.
That I think that's actually, I'd add to that as well in terms of stories, because one of the things we did in looking at what was happening in Dorset, to look for people who were already doing the right thing. And a couple of people have mentioned this today during conversations, actually, is very often you don't realize what's already going on in your own town, and certainly not the next town down. But actually trying to find out what's going on is very often quite inspirational to give people ideas about what they can do themselves. We found, we had to stop in the end, but we found 125 examples of groups who were already set up doing things, not on the scale that Jamie's doing, but on a smaller scale. Groups who are doing things around waste projects, groups who are doing things around transport, groups who are doing things around social justice. And many people who were even active in those fields didn't know they were happening. So I think if you're looking to do something and thinking, what can I do? I think it's to reach out and look at some of these things, look at some of the things we've got in our report, because there's great examples there of groups of people who've been doing things. And I think often it's about what inspires you, what you want to get involved in, is a way of starting out. Gary, I don't know if you experience of groups starting out themselves and how they've got going.
Actually, I am here in Ukraine. They have, let's say, rural communities that were established when the war started 8 years ago. and I'm a member of one of those communities. It's called a Gramada. These can't start with everything working well, but the fact of the matter is, particularly when we're dealing with younger people and people who have the interest for the future, is that they will begin to work to develop their communities in ways in which that would not have happened if they had not tried to begin to do something. So that's why I particularly like the idea that of young people. Many of the older people like me, they will say things, oh, that's very not so good and everything poor. But the young people are quite different. They're out there and they really want to say, you know, a lot of them do, we need to see changes, and you old people cannot be hurting us and the lives. I mean, Greta Thunberg has said that, what, how many times? And others like her. We need to tell the older people, please listen to us. And then hopefully young people, talking to their families and older people, begin to create a better system going forward.
Thanks, Gary. I think, have we got time for one more question, or one more question or one more contribution, if there's any there? If not, one hand just in time.
Thank you. Can you hear me there?
If just a bit closer.
We hear a lot in the climate change debate about the concept of tipping points, the collapse of the West Antarctic ice shelf, melting of the permafrost. There's also a concept of a social tipping point, where if enough people believe something and say something, eventually it becomes the normal conversation within a community. How close do you think we are in the UK to that tipping point? Social tipping point. And are we actually making any progress towards it?
I can talk about Derby more, because I will. That's happening in Derby. Somehow we have got in all of the different facets across the city. And I think it's quite easy, because Derby essentially is all it is for me to say is just a town. It's not a city. It is a town. There's 145 different dialects spoken in Derby, you know, and the population is under 250,000. So it's a cultural melting pot, which is incredible. It's like a mini London. You think about all these different people being in one place and sharing a vision that we've shared. You know, we've kind of crossed every demographic that we need to cross over, and people talk to me about them talking about us, which is crazy. You know, they're talking about down to earth in meetings, stakeholder groups and meetings and stuff. So we've captured the imagination, we've infected them with an idea, and we're letting them just run loose with it. And it's all energy, and it's all about spreading positivity. And you know, for down to earth, we start in Derby, but we want to take this across the country. You know, we build a framework here. We can deliver that across the country, and it's all about narrative. It's all about telling the right story, using the right words. You might know, or you might have kind of seen, I don't talk about climate. I talk about our relationship with nature, and I talk about how important that relationship is with nature, because we are individualistic by our new kind of instincts now. So you're getting into people's minds. I hope that semi-answers your question.
Well, at the tipping point, let me just make a quick note about Ukraine and tipping point. Most of you perhaps know that, or you don't. I mean, there's a total tipping point, because when Russia came to Ukraine, it said, oh, we're going to in 3 days, we're going to take care of you. But as you know today, that's not what's happening. The Russian people, I mean, the Ukrainian people, have been able to back off all the Russian people, and they're continuing to back them out of the country. And God willing, that's going to happen soon, and less people are going to be killed. But, you know, these are people that are saying, it's our land, it's our country, it's our future, we're going to take care of it. And I think basically that's a nice kind of a philosophy for many climate action activities in the world. Same thing.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I also think that one of the things I've observed is that when people get involved in the general community action we're talking about, again, whether it's the types of Jamie's projects or whether it's waste projects or whether it's actual activism, is that they come in, it gives them hope, but also very quickly it raises their awareness and education level. They then want to see politicians acting in a manner that suits the things that they've learned about. And so one of the things that we're thinking of doing is bringing all of those groups together. So whether it's the actual direct active climate groups, whether it's people like Jamie's, or whether it's even people like the Women's Institute and the other organizations that have a concern about it, but actually, you know, aren't actively in the process of being climate activists. But actually, if you can call those groups together, going back to that analogy earlier, it raises the number of stones that are in that are pulling politicians along. It pushes more of them in a certain direction. And at some point, you hit that tipping point. I think Mary Robinson said something similar in her opening statement about, probably not in this respect, but if you keep pushing, actually, you don't know when you're going to get to that point, but suddenly it happens much quicker than you expect that it could have done. So I think it's really about how we just keep building that groundswell. Extinction Rebellion did some analysis that said if you can get 3.5% of people active behind the cause, then that's enough to force that tipping point, whether that's accurate or not. But I think what it means is you don't have to have in your mind that you have to convince 80% of the population to be on the streets. But I think you need to just get that groundswell of opinion that's enough, that gives people hope, raises awareness, and then starts to change the narrative. I think we're probably out of time now. I will finish just with one quote, because again, Mary Robinson started this morning with a Mandela quote, and it struck me in terms of what we've been talking about in terms of community action, which is often about both doing something, but also having that vision. And one of his great quotes was that action without vision is only wasting time. Vision without action is merely daydreaming, but vision with action can change the world. Thank you very much.